When we observe conflict in the world, especially one that erupts between nations such as Israel and Iran, most people focus on the visible, the political statements, the military responses, the justifications given by governments. Yet what is visible is merely the outer shell. The deeper cause lies within the invisible. It lies within the inner world of human beings, within the mind, within consciousness. Conflict on the outside is only a reflection of conflict on the inside. No war has ever begun in the sky. No missile has ever fired itself. Every action begins with thought. And every destructive action begins with a thought that has not been mastered. The real battlefield is not the border between two nations, but the battlefield between fear and awareness inside the human mind. In the Shaolin tradition, we learn that before you confront an enemy in the external world, you must first examine your relationship with the internal enemy, the untrained mind. An undisciplined mind is like a blade in the hands of a child. It reacts, it flinches, it attacks when it feels threatened. This is not wisdom. This is instinct corrupted by fear. And when entire societies are governed by leaders whose minds are clouded by this reactive nature, wars become inevitable. It does not matter which country fires the first strike. What matters is who was first defeated by fear. Who allowed fear to dictate their strategy? Who let ancient pain decide modern decisions? Israel's attack on Iran is not just a geopolitical act. It is a symptom of a larger illness. It is not an isolated event, but a ripple created by the stone of fear thrown into the collective pond of human thought. This fear is not new. It is old, ancient, embedded into generations. It is the fear of annihilation, the fear of losing power, the fear of vulnerability. And just as an individual who feels powerless might resort to aggression, so too do nations behave in the same unconscious manner when they lose their connection to presence and wisdom. You see, when two people argue, we often say they are fighting over something, but in reality they are fighting because of something within themselves. The subject of the fight is not the true cause. It is only the trigger. The cause lies beneath, in insecurity, in pride, in unacknowledged trauma. Now imagine two nations operating from these same internal forces. They are not arguing merely over land, over nuclear threats or ideology. These are the surface level stories. The deeper cause is that the leaders of these nations have not resolved their internal wars, and so they project their fear outward, trying to conquer what they do not understand, trying to silence what threatens their illusion of safety. We are living in a time where speed has replaced depth. Decisions are made rapidly, information travels instantly, but wisdom cannot be rushed. It requires stillness. When leaders lack stillness, they become like boats without an anchor, tossed by every wave of emotion, every wind of fear, every current of ambition. In such a state, any provocation becomes an excuse for violence. But the provocation is never the real reason. The real reason is that they are not at peace with themselves. There is a lesson here for every individual, because before you judge the leaders of nations, ask yourself, when was the last time you reacted out of fear? When did you attack someone not because they harmed you, but because their words touched an old wound you never healed? Just as individuals act from their wounds, so do collectives. Nations are simply extensions of human consciousness, magnified by scale and technology. So if you truly wish to understand the real reason Israel attacked Iran, you must stop looking only at the battlefield and begin observing the battlefield of the human mind. In our training, we are taught to observe the gap between stimulus and response. A provocation comes, but we do not immediately act. We breathe. We become aware. In that awareness, we see not only the surface of the event, but the layers beneath. Perhaps the enemy in front of us is not our true enemy. Perhaps he is merely a mirror, showing us something inside ourselves that we have refused to confront. The enemy outside only exists because there is something unresolved inside. And so, when Israel perceives Iran as a threat, what is truly happening? Is it Iran they fear, Or is it the fear of losing control? Is it the image of power that must be protected at all costs? When you examine your own life, how often do you react not to preserve truth, but to preserve image? How often do you strike not because it is necessary, but because your ego feels exposed? What if the real threat is not Iran's actions, but Israel's own inner fear of becoming vulnerable? Because vulnerability, in the eyes of those who equate strength with domination, feels like death. But in reality, vulnerability is not death. It is the beginning of transformation. It is the doorway to healing. The mistake we continue to repeat as a species is to confuse strength with aggression and vulnerability with weakness. This is the same mistake that creates war after war. And so long as this misunderstanding exists, we will continue to watch nations destroy each other while convincing themselves they are defending peace. But peace cannot be defended by war. It must be cultivated from within. If a tree is sick, you do not paint the leaves green. You go to the roots. And if humanity is in conflict, we must go to the roots of that conflict. The restless, frightened, unaware human mind. This is not a political analysis. This is not an endorsement of one side over the other. It is a call to return to the source. The source of action is thought. The source of thought is awareness. If awareness is missing, all thought becomes distorted. And when distorted thought governs nations, no law, no negotiation, no treaty can prevent the inevitable outcome. This is why true change does not begin in parliament halls or military bases. It begins in meditation halls, in quiet reflection, in the hearts of those who dare to see beyond the surface. And yet what is most tragic is that we have forgotten to teach this. Children are raised learning how to compete, how to win, how to conquer, but not how to listen to their inner world. We teach them history of wars, but not the psychology of peace. And so the cycle continues. Leaders are elected not because of their inner stillness, but because of their outer performance. We choose charisma over clarity, noise over silence, and then we wonder why peace is so elusive. We have created a world that rewards reaction and punishes reflection. But the way out of this is not despair. It is awareness. If Israel had paused before attacking, if its leaders had sat with their own fear, if they had reflected on whether their actions came from wisdom or from a defensive ego, what would they have discovered? Perhaps they would have seen that Iran is not the true enemy. Perhaps they would have discovered that the enemy is the part of themselves that still clings to past wounds, historical trauma, collective paranoia. And perhaps if Iran had done the same, it would have seen that resistance without understanding only creates more pain. Because peace without inner resolution is just silence waiting to be broken. To understand why Israel attacked Iran, one must go beyond headlines, one must go beyond official statements, one must enter the realm of consciousness. There you will find a deeper truth, one that is uncomfortable but liberating. The truth that all conflict begins in the mind. The truth that untrained minds create trained armies. The truth that unless we train the mind first, all our outer efforts will eventually collapse under the weight of our inner chaos. In the Shaolin Temple, we are taught that the highest warrior is not the one who defeats 1,000 enemies, but the one who defeats the enemy within. That enemy is impatience, pride, fear, ignorance, and unconsciousness. When those forces are conquered, outer battles become unnecessary. A wise warrior chooses his battles carefully, and often the greatest choice is to not fight at all. Not out of weakness, but out of understanding that not every threat requires a reaction. Imagine for a moment a world where leaders were trained in presence before politics, in awareness before authority. Imagine a world where children were taught to observe their thoughts before acting on them. Imagine a world where breath was considered more powerful than bullets. This is not a fantasy. This is a possibility. But it requires a shift from reaction to reflection, from domination to understanding, from fear to stillness. Israel attacked Iran, not because they had to, but because they believed they had no other choice. That belief is born from fear. But fear is not the enemy either. Fear is simply the messenger, telling us where we have lost connection with truth. Instead of listening to fear, they fought it. And in doing so, they fought themselves. That is what war truly is. The externalization of an internal fight we refuse to face. And it is this fight that we must now awaken to, not just as nations, but as individuals. Because the world does not change when countries change. The world changes when individuals awaken. And the first step of awakening is to see clearly, not just what is happening, but why it is happening. Not just who is attacking, but who is afraid. Not just who is right, but who is conscious. And when enough of us choose this path, the real reason for any war, past or future, will no longer be hidden. It will be exposed. Not in the form of blame, but in the light of awareness. And in that light, healing can finally begin. The desire to control is one of the deepest illusions in the human experience. We believe that if we can control our surroundings, if we can dominate others, if we can make everything bend to our will, then we will finally be safe, we will finally be strong, we will finally find peace. But this belief is not wisdom. It is fear disguised as strategy. And it is this illusion that continues to lead individuals and nations toward destruction. Israel's attack on Iran did not arise from true power. It arose from the perceived need to control what cannot be controlled. That is the real seed of this conflict. In the Shaolin tradition, we are reminded daily that control is like trying to grasp water with your hand. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. A calm palm, open and steady, can hold more than a fist ever can. But the ego does not understand this. The ego believes that safety comes from grasping. It believes that to let go is to become weak, and so it clenches, it tenses, it reacts. When a nation, led by fear, clutches tightly at the idea of dominance, it is not strength that drives it. It is a profound insecurity. And insecurity is the most dangerous state for any mind to act from. Israel, in attacking Iran, acted from this illusion of control. The idea was simple: to neutralize a threat before the threat becomes unmanageable. But in trying to control the future, they destabilized the present. This is what happens when actions are taken not from stillness, but from fear. Fear always wants to predict. Fear wants to prevent. Fear wants to act before understanding. But wisdom is different. Wisdom waits. Wisdom listens. Wisdom responds, not with haste, but with depth. We must ask ourselves, what was Israel trying to control? Was it Iran's military capability? Was it their influence? Was it their perceived intentions? No matter the answer, the truth remains the same. They were trying to control uncertainty. But life is always uncertain. The future is never guaranteed. And any attempt to dominate uncertainty leads only to suffering. Instead of learning to live with the unknown, humanity has tried to conquer it. But what is unknown cannot be conquered. It can only be understood, integrated, accepted. This applies not only to nations, but to each of us. In our daily lives, how often do we act from this illusion? We try to control the behavior of others. We try to control outcomes. We try to force people to think like us, feel like us, act like us. We think that if we can shape the external world perfectly, then the internal world will be at peace. But the opposite is true. When the internal world is at peace, the external no longer needs to be controlled. Inner stillness does not depend on outer circumstances. It creates harmony regardless of them. When Israel launched its attack, it was an attempt to remove a perceived threat. But the irony is that by trying to eliminate fear externally, they fed it internally. Control breeds more control. Violence breeds more violence. And so the cycle continues. One action leads to retaliation. One blow leads to another. The world watches, caught in a storm that was born not from strength, but from an inability to let go of the need to dominate. True warriors know this. A true martial artist does not need to prove power. In fact, the more skilled the warrior, the less he desires to fight, because he understands that control is never the answer. Mastery is not about overpowering others. It is about mastering oneself. The world sees missiles, military tactics, alliances. But what we must see is the energy behind these actions. That energy is fear, masked as authority. It is ego, masked as necessity. You cannot control another person's thoughts. You cannot control a nation's path. You cannot control how the future unfolds. You can only control your own clarity, your own response, your own intention. But when intention is clouded by fear, even well-planned actions bring chaos. Israel believed that a strategic move would create security. But what is created from fear cannot produce safety. It may create temporary silence, but not peace. It may force a pause, but not understanding. This is where we must return to inner mastery. The illusion of control is seductive. It gives us the feeling of certainty, but certainty is an illusion too. Everything changes. Every moment is new. Every being is evolving. To live wisely is to flow with change, not to fight it. When you resist the river, you exhaust yourself. When you flow with it, you find power in surrender. Surrender is not defeat. It is alignment. But the world teaches us to resist, to push, to force. And so nations do the same. They resist what they cannot understand. They try to stop what they cannot accept. And they destroy what they cannot control. If Israel had acted from clarity instead of fear, what might have been possible? Could there have been a conversation, a deeper understanding, an opportunity for transformation? But clarity cannot exist where fear reigns. And so long as the mind seeks control over awareness, destruction will always follow. This is why spiritual practice is not a luxury. It is essential. Without it, we are at the mercy of the ego. And the ego, left unchecked, will always choose reaction over reflection, power over peace, control over connection. What we see in this conflict is a mirror of the collective mind. It shows us how far we have drifted from the inner path. It shows us that we still equate action with strength and silence with weakness. But it is in the silence that truth arises. It is in stillness that vision becomes clear. And it is in letting go that wisdom is revealed. When we stop trying to control others, we gain control over ourselves. When we stop trying to shape the world, we begin to understand it. When we stop forcing outcomes, we allow space for miracles. The world does not need more force. It needs more depth. It needs more individuals who are willing to unlearn the illusion of control and discover the power of presence. Every great teacher throughout history has spoken of this. Not one of them taught control as a path to peace. They taught compassion, patience, understanding, awareness. These are not weak traits. They are the foundation of true power, and they are absent in most decisions made at the highest levels of leadership today. It is time we redefine strength. It is time we remember that control over others is not strength. It is insecurity, acting out. Real strength is to remain rooted in truth when everything around you is uncertain. Real strength is to respond with clarity when provoked. Real strength is to protect, not through domination, but through understanding. Israel, in this case, has shown us not how strong they are, but how afraid they still are. And fear, unless transformed, will always create more enemies than it removes. To the one who walks the spiritual path, this is a reminder. The world outside will always challenge your inner peace, but your task is not to control the world. It is to return again and again to your breath, to your awareness, to your center. There, and only there, do you find the clarity to see through illusion. And when enough individuals live from that clarity, the actions of nations will change. Because leaders do not exist in isolation, they rise from the collective consciousness. Change the consciousness, and you change the course of history. But we must begin with ourselves. Ask yourself, where in your life are you trying to control? Where are you holding too tightly? Where are you acting from fear? In every moment you have a choice, to react or to reflect, to grip or to let go, to dominate or to understand. These choices shape not only your life, but the energy you contribute to the world. If you want peace, you must choose differently, not once, but daily. Not in big decisions, but in the smallest ones. Let the illusion of control fall away. Let it dissolve in the light of awareness. And from that space, allow a new way of being to emerge, a way rooted in presence, in courage, in the wisdom of not needing to control. For only then will destruction give way to creation. And only then will peace no longer be a dream, but a lived reality. When an event shocks the world, when nations clash and violence erupts, the first thing that disappears is clarity. In its place comes noise, an overwhelming storm of opinions, judgments, fears, and emotions that spread like wildfire through every screen, every conversation, every mind. But beneath all of that noise, beneath the layers of grief, anger, nationalism, and historical pain, the truth still exists. It does not scream. It does not demand attention. It whispers, quietly, patiently, to those willing to listen, not just with their ears, but with their inner awareness. The truth is not missing. It is simply buried under the heavy weight of collective emotion. When Israel attacked Iran, the world responded immediately, not with understanding, but with emotion. Some called it justified, others called it aggression. Some felt fear, others felt pride. Some rushed to support, others rushed to condemn. But few paused, few stepped back, few asked, what is this emotion I feel right now? Is it my own, or is it something I've inherited from media, from history, from culture? Because before we understand the truth of any situation, we must understand the emotions that surround it. Emotions are not obstacles, but if we do not recognize them as separate from truth, they become barriers to it. In the training of the Shaolin path, we are taught to see every emotion as a visitor. When anger comes, we bow. When fear arrives, we acknowledge it. When sadness flows, we allow it to move through us. But we do not become those emotions. We observe them, we learn from them, we feel them, but we do not act from them blindly. And this is the difference between a conscious being and a reactive one. A conscious being uses emotion as a compass. A reactive one uses it as a weapon. When nations become reactive, their weapons are no longer just symbolic. They become missiles, fire, blood, and all of it is driven not by truth, but by unexamined emotional energy. You must understand this. Collective emotion is more powerful than logic. It moves crowds, it shapes governments, it fuels wars. And unless it is understood, it blinds even the wisest people. When a society feels threatened, it does not pause to reflect. It clings to stories, to narratives, to the comfort of us versus them. It gathers old wounds and dresses them in new language. It speaks of justice, but often it seeks revenge. It speaks of peace, but acts from fear. And so the truth, which requires stillness, gets drowned in the collective storm. Look closely at any conflict in history, and you will find this pattern repeating. Emotion clouds perception. Perception guides action. Action creates more emotion. And round it goes, with very few ever questioning the foundation. They say this is justice, but is it truly, or is it just pain responding to pain? They say we had no choice, but is that truth, or just the voice of collective fear speaking louder than inner awareness? When Israel struck Iran, most of the world saw only two possibilities, right or wrong, defense or aggression, provocation or retaliation. But the real understanding lies beyond that binary. It lies in recognizing that every nation is made up of people, and every person is influenced not just by their own experiences, but by the emotional waves that surround them. Leaders, too, are human, and humans, unless trained to observe the mind, are deeply influenced by the invisible currents of emotion, especially fear. And fear is the most contagious of all emotions. When one nation acts from fear, it creates fear in others. That fear spreads. It becomes outrage, it becomes tribalism, it becomes identity. And soon, entire populations forget who they are beneath that fear. They forget the humanity of the other. They forget their own. What remains is reaction. And reaction can never produce clarity. It can only produce more fog. That fog is where the truth hides. And if we wish to see clearly, we must first clear the fog within ourselves. That means turning inward. That means asking, what am I feeling? Why do I feel this? Is this mine, or is this something I've absorbed from the world around me? In that questioning, we begin to peel back the layers. We begin to recognize that beneath the emotion is an ancient story, one passed from generation to generation, story of pain, of division, of survival. But what if that story is not the only one available? What if it's just the loudest one? The truth is quiet, always. It doesn't argue. It doesn't force. It waits. It waits for the mind to become still. It waits for the heart to open. It waits for the emotion to pass so it can be seen. That is why so few find it. Because so few are willing to be still long enough to see through their own emotional lenses. But if we do, if we commit to clarity, we begin to notice something profound, that most of what we believe is not truth, but emotion crystallized into belief. And those beliefs, if not examined, become the root of suffering. A belief is not dangerous in itself, but when it is born from unprocessed emotion, it becomes rigid. It becomes a wall. And those walls separate people, nations, souls. When Israel acted, they acted from a belief that Iran posed a threat, a belief that decisive action was the only way to ensure survival. But if that belief was rooted in emotion and not in deep clarity, then it was already compromised. Because truth does not require haste. Truth does not arise from panic. Truth does not shout. It simply is. This is why spiritual practice is so essential in the modern world. It is not something reserved for monks or sages. It is a tool, a necessary discipline for every human being who wants to live in harmony with the world. Without it, we are at the mercy of the emotional currents that pass through media, through culture, through history. We become puppets of our pain. And in that state, we cannot lead. We cannot love. We cannot see. All we can do is repeat the old patterns, the old wars, the old suffering. But there is another way. There is a way of awareness, a way of breath, a way of silence. When you sit in silence, when you allow the emotion to rise and pass like a wave, you begin to see what is beneath it. And beneath it is something astonishing. Not fear, not hatred, but longing. Longing for connection, longing for safety, longing for peace. Even those who fight the hardest, deep within them is this longing. But they have lost the path to it. They have mistaken protection for peace. They have mistaken retaliation for resolution. They have mistaken emotion for truth. Let us not do the same. Let us not be quick to choose sides based on emotion. Let us not allow the loudness of the world to drown out the still voice of truth. Let us instead become still. Not passive, but inwardly still, so that when we act not from emotion, but from clarity. Not from fear, but from presence. Not from separation, but from deep understanding of our shared human nature. Because in truth, there is no us and them. There is only one. One breath. One awareness. One consciousness, expressing itself through many forms, But as long as emotion clouds our perception, we will continue to see division. And where there is division, conflict follows. Israel and Iran are two nations with long histories, complex identities, deep wounds. Their actions cannot be understood without acknowledging the emotional weight they carry, not just politically, but energetically. Generations of fear, suspicion, trauma. That weight is what shapes their decisions. Not just strategy, but centuries of inherited emotion. To understand truth, we must be willing to feel that, to hold it with compassion. Not to justify it, but to understand its roots. Because only when we understand can we begin to transform. And only when we transform can we truly move beyond the cycles of violence. The media will not tell you this. The headlines will not show you this. But your breath will. Your stillness will. Your willingness to feel, not just what you're told to feel, but what truly lives in your heart, will. This is not philosophy. This is practice. This is life. And this is what the world needs now more than ever. Not more opinions, not more reactions, but more awareness. The truth is here. It has always been here. But to find it, we must first move through the fog. Through the noise, through the layers of collective emotion that keep us blind. When we do, the truth will no longer need to be uncovered. It will reveal itself. Quietly, clearly, completely.